Picture this: a young man standing at the crossroads of mediocrity and greatness, holding in his hands the power to transform not just his own life, but the entire landscape of American business and success. This is the story of possibility, of unwavering determination, and of a philosophy so powerful that it launched thousands of dreamers into the stratosphere of achievement. Orison Swett Marden wasn't born into privilege, wealth, or opportunity. No silver spoon graced his infant mouth. No family fortune awaited his maturity. No influential connections promised an easy path to success. Instead, he entered this world in 1848 in the rural backwoods of New Hampshire, orphaned before he could even understand what the word meant, shuttled between relatives who saw him more as a burden than a blessing. But within that young boy burned a fire, an unquenchable thirst for something more, something greater, something that would eventually reshape how an entire generation thought about business, success, and the human potential for achievement. Young Orison found himself working on farms, laboring in ways that would break most modern spirits, rising before dawn and collapsing long after sunset, his hands calloused and bleeding, his body aching from endless toil. Most would have accepted this fate, resigned themselves to a life of hard labor and quiet desperation. But Marden possessed something different, something extraordinary, a mind that refused to accept limitation, a spirit that saw beyond the immediate circumstances, a heart that believed in possibilities others couldn't even imagine. The turning point came when he discovered a battered copy of Samuel Smiles's self-help in an attic. This wasn't just any book. This was a revelation, a roadmap, a beacon of light piercing through the darkness of his circumstances. As he read by candlelight, exhausted from the day's labor, something awakened within him. The words on those yellowed pages didn't just inform him, they transformed him. They ignited a vision of what life could become, what he could become, what any person willing to embrace the right principles could achieve. From that moment forward, Marden became obsessed not just with his own success, but with understanding the very principles that separate those who achieve greatness from those who merely exist. He worked his way through college, not once, not twice, but earning multiple degrees while simultaneously running businesses, managing hotels, and studying the lives of successful individuals with the intensity of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. Every successful person he encountered became a case study, every failure a lesson, every obstacle an opportunity to refine his understanding of what truly creates lasting success in business and in life. The philosophy that emerged from Marden's experiences wasn't some abstract theoretical framework divorced from reality. No, this was battle-tested wisdom forged in the fires of real-world struggle, polished through countless failures and victories, refined through the careful observation of thousands of successful individuals across every conceivable field of endeavor. What he discovered would eventually fill dozens of books and millions of pages, but at its core lay several fundamental truths about business, success, and human achievement that remain as relevant today as they were over a century ago. Marden understood that progressive business wasn't about cutthroat competition, ruthless exploitation, or stepping on others to climb higher. Instead, he saw clearly that the most successful businesses, the ones that endured and thrived across generations, were built on principles of service, integrity, continuous improvement, and genuine value creation. The progressive businessman, in Marden's vision, wasn't someone who merely sought profit, but someone who understood that profit flows naturally from serving others better, from constantly improving, from maintaining unwavering standards of excellence and ethics. Consider the principle of thoroughness that Marden emphasized with almost religious fervor. In an age where many sought shortcuts and quick profits, where shoddy workmanship and deceptive practices were common, Marden preached the gospel of doing things completely, properly, excellently. He told stories of businessmen who built empires not through clever tricks, but through the simple commitment to never releasing a product or service that wasn't their absolute best work. One furniture maker he wrote about would rather burn a piece than sell something with even the slightest imperfection, even if that imperfection would never be seen by the customer. This wasn't foolishness, this was wisdom, because that commitment to excellence became the foundation of a reputation that brought customers flooding through his doors. The progressive businessman, Marden insisted, must cultivate what he called the finishing touch. How many businesses fail, how many careers stall, how many opportunities evaporate because someone stopped just short of excellence. The work is 90% complete, good enough for most standards, but lacking that final polish, that ultimate refinement that transforms good into great, acceptable into exceptional, forgettable into unforgettable. Marden shared the story of a young clerk who stayed late every evening, not because his employer demanded it, but because he refused to leave work half done, letters half written, accounts not perfectly balanced. His colleagues mocked him, called him foolish for giving free labor, suggested he was wasting his youth. But within 5 years, that young clerk owned his own firm, while his mockers remained in their same positions, wondering why opportunity never knocked on their doors. The answer, Marden explained, lay in understanding a fundamental truth about success in business. The market rewards excellence, people gravitate toward quality, opportunities flow to those who demonstrate superior capability. That young clerk wasn't working for his employer. Those late evenings, he was working for himself, building a reputation, developing habits, creating a personal brand of excellence that became impossible to ignore. When customers needed someone absolutely reliable, they thought of him. When business owners needed a partner they could trust, his name arose. When investors sought someone to back, they remembered his unwavering commitment to doing things right. But thoroughness alone wasn't enough in Marden's philosophy of progressive business. He recognized that the business landscape constantly evolves, that methods that work today become obsolete tomorrow, that the businessman who stops learning starts dying. The progressive businessman must become a perpetual student, not just of his own industry, but of human nature, of emerging trends, of technological advances, of cultural shifts. Marden himself embodied this principle, constantly reading, attending lectures, interviewing successful individuals, synthesizing knowledge from diverse fields to create new insights and applications. He told the story of a manufacturer who attended every trade show, read every industry publication, visited competitors' facilities whenever possible, not to steal ideas, but to understand the direction of his industry. While others saw him as paranoid or obsessive, he saw patterns emerging, technologies developing, customer preferences shifting. When a major change swept through his industry, catching most manufacturers completely unprepared and bankrupting many, he had already adapted, already positioned himself to thrive in the new environment, already developed products and processes that aligned with the emerging reality. His competitors called it luck, but Marden identified it correctly as the natural result of vigilant awareness and continuous learning. The principle of initiative formed another cornerstone of Marden's progressive business philosophy. How many potentially great businessmen remain trapped in mediocrity because they wait for permission, wait for perfect circumstances, wait for someone else to take the first step? The progressive businessman, Marden taught, sees an opportunity and acts, sees a problem and solves it, sees a need and fills it, without waiting for authorization or ideal conditions. Initiative doesn't mean recklessness, it means the courage to begin, the willingness to take responsibility, the confidence to trust one's own judgment. Marden recounted the experience of a young employee in a struggling company who noticed that customers frequently complained about a particular aspect of their service. Rather than merely noting the complaints or mentioning them to supervisors, he took initiative, developed a solution, implemented it within his sphere of influence, and documented the results. When he finally presented his improvements to management, he didn't come with problems and complaints. He came with solutions and proof. Within a year, he was managing the department. Within 3 years, he was a partner in the firm. All because he demonstrated the initiative that separates leaders from followers, achievers from observers. This principle of initiative connected directly to another of Marden's core teachings. The progressive businessman must develop the ability to see opportunities where others see only problems or empty space. The business landscape is filled with unmet needs, inefficiencies begging to be solved, markets waiting to be served, improvements longing to be implemented. But most people walk past these opportunities daily, blind to the possibilities, focused on existing structures rather than potential innovations. The truly progressive businessman trains himself to see differently, to question assumptions, to ask what if and why not, and how might this be better. One of Marden's favorite examples involved a man who noticed that hotels in major cities had no convenient way to transport guests and their luggage from train stations. While thousands of travelers experienced this frustration daily, one entrepreneur saw an opportunity, developed a solution, and created a thriving business that eventually expanded to dozens of cities. The need existed all along, visible to anyone who paid attention, but only one person combined awareness with initiative, vision with action, observation with implementation. The cultivation of personal magnetism represented yet another dimension of Marden's progressive business philosophy, though perhaps personal magnetism isn't quite the right term. What Marden described was more accurately the development of those qualities that naturally draw people, opportunities, and success into one's orbit. He observed that certain businessmen seemed to effortlessly attract customers, partners, employees, and opportunities, while others struggled despite comparable skills and knowledge. The difference, he concluded, lay not in luck or connections, but in cultivated personal qualities, in the energy one projected, the confidence one embodied, the integrity one demonstrated, the enthusiasm one radiated. This personal magnetism couldn't be faked or manufactured through superficial techniques. Instead, it emerged naturally from genuine development of character, from absolute belief in one's product or service, from sincere desire to serve and help others, from unwavering commitment to ethical principles. Marden shared numerous accounts of businessmen whose personal presence alone inspired confidence, whose word was considered as binding as any contract, whose handshake meant more than another man's signed agreement. These individuals built business empires not through manipulation or salesmanship in the cheap sense, but through becoming the kind of person others naturally wanted to work with, buy from, and support. Central to this personal magnetism was what Marden called the success atmosphere, an intangible but unmistakable quality that successful individuals and businesses emanated. Walk into some establishments and you immediately sense order, efficiency, prosperity, confidence. Walk into others and you feel chaos, desperation, decline. These atmospheres aren't accidental, they're created through countless small choices, through the standards maintained, through the attitude projected, through the example set by leadership. The progressive businessman, Marden insisted, must consciously create a success atmosphere, must ensure that every aspect of his business, from the cleanliness of the premises to the attitude of employees to the quality of products, communicates excellence, prosperity, and forward momentum. He described visiting 2 competing stores in the same city, selling similar products at similar prices. One was struggling while the other thrived, and the difference became obvious within moments of entering each establishment. The successful store radiated prosperity. Its displays were immaculate, its staff enthusiastic and helpful, its atmosphere inviting and energizing. The struggling store felt depressing, its displays neglected, its staff indifferent or hostile, its atmosphere draining. Customers instinctively gravitated toward the successful store even when they couldn't articulate exactly why. They simply felt better there, more confident in their purchases, more valued as customers. Marden recognized that creating this success atmosphere required unwavering attention to details that many considered trivial. The progressive businessman understands that there are no trivial details, that everything communicates something, that customers and partners form impressions from countless tiny observations. A dusty display window suggests declining business and attention to quality. A well-dressed, enthusiastic employee suggests a company that values and invests in its people. A clean, organized workspace suggests efficiency and professionalism. Each detail might seem insignificant in isolation, but collectively they create the atmosphere that either attracts or repels success. The principle of persistence formed perhaps the bedrock of Marden's entire philosophy, though he was careful to distinguish persistence from mere stubbornness. True persistence, he taught, meant unwavering commitment to one's ultimate goals, combined with flexibility about methods and paths. The progressive businessman persists through obstacles, setbacks, failures, and discouragements, but also learns from each challenge, adapts strategies, refines approaches, and continuously improves execution. Marden filled his writings with stories of businessmen who succeeded only after numerous failures, who built fortunes after losing everything, who achieved greatness only after years of struggle that would have broken lesser individuals. These weren't stories meant to discourage or intimidate, but rather to inspire, to provide perspective, to remind readers that temporary failure is simply the tuition paid for eventual success. Every successful businessman, Marden observed, could tell stories of dark moments, of times when failure seemed certain, when giving up appeared to be the only rational choice. But they persisted, they adapted, they learned, they grew, and ultimately they prevailed. One manufacturer, Marden, wrote about faced bankruptcy after a fire destroyed his factory, with no insurance, no savings, and debts mounting. Most would have declared defeat, accepted bankruptcy, and sought employment elsewhere. Instead, he immediately began rebuilding, working personally alongside hired laborers, selling equipment and personal possessions to fund reconstruction, convincing creditors to extend patience by demonstrating unwavering commitment to honoring every obligation. Within 2 years, he had not only rebuilt but expanded, not only survived but thrived, not only recovered but achieved greater success than before the fire. The disaster that should have ended his career instead became the catalyst for developing the resilience, resourcefulness, and reputation that propelled him to far greater heights. This story illustrated another of Marden's key principles. The progressive businessman views obstacles not as stop signs but as detours, not as endings but as opportunities to demonstrate character, develop capability, and discover new paths. The easy path rarely leads to significant achievement. Obstacles filter out those merely interested from those truly committed. They separate those seeking quick wins from those building lasting success. They reveal who possesses the strength to endure and the wisdom to learn. Around the 10-minute mark, I want to pause and ask you something important. If you're finding value in this journey through Marden's wisdom, if these principles are resonating with you and sparking ideas, please take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to Audiobook Library. Your support directly helps this channel grow and allows us to bring you more transformative content like this. It costs you nothing but means everything to us. Marden placed enormous emphasis on the cultivation of what he termed the commercial imagination, the ability to envision possibilities, to see potential where others see only present reality, to imagine solutions before they exist, to picture success before achieving it. This wasn't wishful thinking or fantasy, but rather the disciplined application of creative thinking to business challenges and opportunities. The progressive businessman must develop the capacity to mentally test ideas, to envision outcomes, to imagine customer reactions, to picture processes and systems before implementing them. He contrasted the businessman with commercial imagination to the mere imitator who only copies what already exists, who waits for others to prove concepts before adopting them, who follows trends rather than creating them. The imitator might achieve moderate success by efficiently copying successful models, but the individual with commercial imagination creates new markets, develops innovative solutions, establishes new standards that others then scramble to imitate. The difference between these approaches isn't just in degree of success, but in the fundamental nature of one's contribution to the business world. Marden shared the example of a young entrepreneur who observed that most restaurants in his city served either cheap, low-quality meals or expensive formal dining experiences, with little in between. He imagined a different concept: moderately priced but high-quality food served in a comfortable, casual atmosphere. Colleagues told him the market didn't exist, that people wanting quality would pay for formal dining, that those seeking casual atmosphere would accept lower quality. But he trusted his commercial imagination, implemented his vision, and created something that resonated powerfully with customers who indeed wanted exactly what he envisioned. Within 5 years, he had expanded to multiple locations, and within 10 years, numerous imitators had adopted his model, proving the market he had imagined into existence. This commercial imagination worked in tandem with what Marden called the habit of finishing, the discipline of completing what one starts, of following through on commitments, of transforming ideas into reality rather than leaving them as mere possibilities. The business world is littered with brilliant ideas never executed, innovative concepts never implemented, promising starts never finished. The progressive businessman develops the habit of completion, the discipline of seeing projects through, the persistence to overcome the inevitable difficulties that arise between conception and realization. The habit of finishing, Marden taught, required developing certain mental and emotional capacities, the ability to maintain enthusiasm through the tedious middle phases of projects, the discipline to continue when novelty fades, the commitment to quality, even when tired or discouraged, the wisdom to push through obstacles rather than abandoning ship at the first sign of difficulty. Many people, he observed, start strong but fade as projects progress, beginning with energy and excitement, but losing momentum when the work becomes routine or challenging. He told of a publisher who noticed that most of his competitors would abandon book projects when sales started slowly, moving on to the next potential bestseller rather than continuing to promote and support existing titles. This publisher took a different approach, committing to thoroughly promote and support every book published, giving each title the full effort required to find its audience. While competitors published more titles, his firm published fewer but more successful ones, books that sold steadily for years rather than spiking briefly then disappearing. The habit of finishing, of seeing each project through to genuine completion, created sustainable success while competitors churned through endless cycles of hope and disappointment. Marden understood deeply that the progressive businessman must master the art of building and maintaining relationships, that business success depends not just on product quality or efficient operations, but on the networks of trust, respect, and mutual benefit one cultivates. Every customer relationship, every vendor connection, every employee interaction, every competitor encounter contributes to building one's business reputation and creating the relationships that sustain long-term success. The relationship principle extended beyond mere networking or superficial connection building. Marden advocated for genuine interest in others, for authentic desire to help customers succeed, for real concern about employee welfare, for honest dealing with suppliers and even competitors. This wasn't just ethical advice, though ethics mattered greatly to Marden, but practical wisdom based on observing that businesses built on genuine relationships proved far more resilient and ultimately successful than those built purely on transactions. One businessman Marden wrote about made a practice of visiting customers personally, not to sell them anything but simply to understand their businesses, their challenges, their needs. He would spend hours discussing their operations, offering insights from his broader industry knowledge, connecting them with potential solutions or partners, genuinely investing in their success. This approach seemed inefficient to competitors focused solely on immediate sales, but over time, this businessman built such loyalty and trust that customers refused to consider alternatives, recommended him enthusiastically to others, and collaborated with him to develop innovations that benefited both parties. The principle of serving others formed the very heart of Marden's progressive business philosophy. He observed that the most successful businesses, the ones that endured across generations and created lasting value, were those fundamentally oriented towards service rather than mere profit. Profit, Marden taught, should be viewed as the natural consequence of serving others well, not as the primary aim of business activity. When business becomes solely about extracting money from customers, relationships become adversarial, practices become questionable, quality suffers, and long-term success becomes impossible. The service-oriented businessman, by contrast, asks constantly how to better serve customers, how to provide more value, how to solve problems more effectively, how to improve the customer experience. This orientation naturally leads to innovations, quality improvements, better practices, and the kind of reputation that attracts and retains customers. Marden shared numerous examples of businesses that thrived by obsessively focusing on customer service, even when doing so seemed to contradict short-term profit maximization. One retailer, for instance, implemented a no-questions-asked return policy decades before such policies became common, absorbing the cost of occasional abuse because he recognized that the trust and loyalty generated far exceeded the losses. Another businessman invested heavily in employee training and development, paying significantly more than competitors for staff, because he understood that skilled, motivated, loyal employees created customer experiences that justified premium pricing and generated referrals worth far more than the additional labor costs. Marden's progressive businessman also understood the critical importance of adaptability, of remaining responsive to changing conditions, evolving customer needs, emerging technologies, and shifting competitive landscapes. Rigidity, he observed, was the death of businesses that had once thrived. The methods that brought success in one era often become obstacles in another. The progressive businessman maintains commitment to core principles while remaining flexible about tactics, holds firm to values while adapting strategies, persists in ultimate goals while modifying approaches. He illustrated this with the story of a carriage manufacturer who saw automobiles emerging and recognized that his industry faced fundamental disruption. While most competitors dismissed automobiles as a passing fad or complained about unfair competition, he adapted, studying automotive technology, developing relationships with automobile manufacturers, eventually transitioning his business to produce automobile components. His flexibility and adaptability allowed him to thrive, while competitors who rigidly clung to carriage manufacturing eventually failed. The principle of continuous improvement represented another cornerstone of Marden's philosophy. The progressive businessman never rests on past achievements, never assumes current methods are optimal, never stops seeking better ways to serve customers, improve operations, enhance quality, or increase efficiency. This commitment to continuous improvement creates a compound effect, small improvements accumulating into substantial competitive advantages, marginal gains multiplying into significant differentiation. Marden described manufacturers who held regular meetings specifically focused on improvement ideas, where employees at every level were encouraged to suggest refinements to products or processes. Some suggestions were trivial, some impractical, but among them were innovations that dramatically improved quality, reduced costs, or enhanced customer satisfaction. The companies that fostered this culture of continuous improvement gradually pulled ahead of competitors who maintained static operations, building advantages that became increasingly difficult to overcome. The cultivation of positive mental attitudes formed yet another crucial dimension of progressive business success in Marden's teaching. He recognized that business involves constant challenges, setbacks, discouragements, and obstacles, and that maintaining optimistic, confident, resilient attitudes despite these difficulties often determined who persisted to success and who abandoned dreams prematurely. The mental attitude one brings to challenges largely determines outcomes, not through magical thinking, but through the practical reality that optimistic people persist longer, try more solutions, learn from failures, and ultimately prevail more often than pessimistic individuals who give up at first obstacles. This emphasis on mental attitude didn't mean ignoring reality or pretending problems didn't exist. Rather, Marden advocated for a particular way of interpreting and responding to challenges, seeing them as temporary and solvable rather than permanent and insurmountable, viewing them as learning opportunities rather than just frustrations, treating them as tests of character rather than signs of defeat. The progressive businessman, in Marden's vision, approaches each setback asking, "What can I learn from this? And how can I grow through this?" rather than "Why is this happening to me?" or "Maybe I should just quit." One entrepreneur, Marden, wrote about faced rejection after rejection when seeking funding for his business concept, with potential investors criticizing his idea as impractical or unmarketable. Rather than becoming discouraged or defensive, he treated each rejection as market research, asking investors to explain their concerns, learning from their critiques, refining his presentation, and even his concept based on feedback. By the time he secured funding, his business plan had improved dramatically through incorporating legitimate concerns while maintaining his core vision, and the business that eventually launched was stronger for having been refined through those initial rejections. The principle of thorough preparation distinguished successful businessmen from those who relied on luck or improvisation. In Marden's observation, the progressive businessman prepares meticulously for important meetings, presentations, negotiations, and decisions, leaving nothing to chance that can be anticipated and planned for. This preparation creates confidence, enables flexibility during execution, and dramatically increases success rates across all business activities. Marden contrasted the prepared businessman with the individual who relies on natural talent or charm, improvising through situations without adequate preparation. While the improviser occasionally succeeds through quick thinking or fortunate circumstances, the prepared individual succeeds consistently, performing at high levels regardless of external conditions. Preparation, Marden taught, was one of the few factors entirely within one's control, making it among the highest return investments of time and energy a businessman could make. He shared the example of a salesman who would spend hours researching potential clients before meetings, understanding their businesses, their challenges, their competitive situations, their likely needs. While competitors walked into sales calls with generic pitches and hoped for the best, this salesman arrived with customized solutions based on genuine understanding, asking informed questions that demonstrated respect and expertise. His close rate far exceeded industry averages not because he was more naturally talented or charismatic, but because he was dramatically better prepared. The progressive businessman must also develop what Marden called the finishing instinct, an almost unconscious drive to complete tasks thoroughly, to dot every I and cross every T, to ensure nothing falls through cracks. This instinct separates those who consistently deliver on commitments from those whose good intentions dissolve into incomplete execution. The finishing instinct isn't about perfectionism that prevents completion, but rather about the discipline to follow through on details, to maintain standards through the final steps, to ensure delivery matches promises. Businesses fail, Marden observed, not primarily from bad ideas or inadequate resources, but from poor execution, from things left undone, from details overlooked, from promises not quite fulfilled. The progressive businessman with the finishing instinct creates systems and habits that ensure consistent follow-through, that catch details before they become problems, that maintain quality standards even during busy periods or challenging circumstances. One hotel owner Marden profiled had implemented a simple but powerful system. Before any guest checked out, a manager would personally inspect their room and the entire guest experience through reviewing logs and speaking briefly with the guest if possible, ensuring nothing had gone wrong, addressing any issues immediately, and capturing feedback while the experience was fresh. This attention to detail, this commitment to ensuring complete satisfaction through the very last moment, created loyalty and reputation that filled his hotel even when competitors struggled. Marden recognized that the progressive businessman must cultivate courage, both the physical courage to take risks and the moral courage to maintain principles under pressure. Business inevitably involves uncertainty, requiring decisions with incomplete information, commitments before outcomes are clear, investments that might fail. The businessman who waits for certainty, who requires guarantees before acting, who avoids all risk, condemns himself to mediocrity at best. Calculated courage, informed risk-taking, confident decision-making despite uncertainty, these qualities separate those who build significant businesses from those who merely sustain small, safe operations. Equally important was moral courage, the strength to maintain ethical standards when cutting corners would be easier or more profitable, to tell truth when deception might serve immediate interests, to treat people fairly when exploitation would increase margins. Marden firmly believed that businesses built on ethical compromises ultimately failed, that reputations destroyed by dishonesty never fully recovered, that short-term gains from questionable practices never justified long-term costs. The progressive businessman, therefore, required courage to stay ethical when others compromised, to maintain standards when competitors didn't, to take the harder right rather than the easier wrong. He told of a manufacturer offered a contract that would require using inferior materials to meet the price point demanded, materials that would reduce product quality below his standards. Every advisor encouraged accepting the contract, arguing that the customer wouldn't notice the difference, that competitors would gladly take the business if he declined, that he couldn't afford to turn down such a large order. But he refused, explaining honestly that he couldn't meet the required price while maintaining his quality standards, suggesting the customer either increase budget or seek alternative suppliers. The customer, impressed by his integrity, increased the budget rather than compromising quality, beginning a relationship that lasted decades and generated far more value than that single contract. The principle of concentration formed another pillar of Marden's progressive business philosophy. In an age of endless opportunities and distractions, the businessman who scattered energy across too many ventures, who chased every promising idea, who diversified prematurely, typically achieved less than the one who concentrated force on specific objectives. Marden taught that success requires sustained, focused effort, that mastery develops through deep engagement with particular challenges, that significant achievements demand concentration of resources, attention, and energy. This didn't mean rigidity or inability to adapt, but rather strategic focus, concentrating on core competencies and primary objectives, while remaining alert to genuine opportunities aligned with overall direction. The progressive businessman, Marden counseled, should master one business before attempting another, should perfect one product line before expanding indiscriminately, should build strong foundations before constructing higher floors. One entrepreneur Marden described turned down numerous opportunities that seemed attractive but would have diverted attention from his primary business, recognizing that his competitors were many while his focused attention was singular. By concentrating all resources, creativity, and energy on becoming absolutely the best in his specific niche, he created a dominant position that generated more profit than scattered efforts across multiple ventures could have produced. The cultivation of enthusiasm represented yet another dimension of progressive business success. Marden observed that enthusiasm was contagious, that passionate businessmen inspired employees, attracted customers, convinced investors, and energized everyone around them. But this enthusiasm couldn't be faked or manufactured artificially. Instead, it emerged naturally from genuine belief in one's product or service, from sincere desire to serve customers, from authentic excitement about the value being created. The progressive businessman, therefore, must ensure alignment between his business activities and his genuine interests and values. Building a business solely for profit in a field one finds boring or meaningless makes sustaining authentic enthusiasm nearly impossible. But when business activities align with personal passion, when the entrepreneur genuinely believes in the value created, when the work itself energizes rather than drains, enthusiasm flows naturally and powerfully. Marden shared the story of a bookseller whose obvious love for books and reading was infectious, who could discuss literature for hours with genuine excitement, who viewed his role not as moving inventory, but as connecting readers with books that would enrich their lives. Customers visited his store not just for books, but for the experience of engaging with someone so passionate about literature, and they bought books they might not have otherwise purchased because his enthusiasm made them curious and excited. The principle of self-reliance formed perhaps the foundation of all Marden's teachings. While he valued collaboration, relationships, and seeking advice, he insisted that the progressive businessman must ultimately rely on his own judgment, trust his own capabilities, and take responsibility for his own success or failure. Excessive dependence on others, waiting for permission or approval, seeking consensus before every decision, these habits undermine the initiative and confidence necessary for significant achievement. Self-reliance didn't mean arrogance or refusal to learn from others, but rather the confidence to make decisions after gathering input, the courage to act on one's own judgment, the willingness to bear responsibility for outcomes. The self-reliant businessman could seek advice without being paralyzed by conflicting counsel, could listen to criticism without being crushed by it, could celebrate successes without becoming complacent, could learn from failures without being destroyed by them. Marden described a young businessman who faced a crucial decision with advisors split in their recommendations, some urging one course, others the opposite. He carefully considered all perspectives, weighed the arguments, reflected on his own experience and knowledge, and then decided based on his best judgment. The decision proved correct, but even if it hadn't, the self-reliance demonstrated in making it would have served him well throughout his career, building the confidence and decision-making capacity that enables sustained leadership. As we move deeper into Marden's philosophy, we discover his profound insights about character as the ultimate foundation of business success. He insisted that skills could be learned, knowledge acquired, connections developed, but character determined whether success endured or crumbled, whether businesses built lasted or collapsed, whether reputations strengthened or dissolved. The progressive businessman, therefore, must prioritize character development above all other investments, recognizing that integrity, reliability, honesty, and ethical behavior create the foundation upon which everything else rests. Character, in Marden's teaching, wasn't about self-righteousness or moral superiority, but about practical qualities that made someone trustworthy, dependable, and honorable in business dealings. A person of character keeps promises even when inconvenient, tells truth even when costly, treats others fairly even when exploitation would be easier, maintains standards even under pressure. These qualities might seem to create disadvantages in the short term, might appear to limit options or reduce immediate profits, but they create enormous advantages over time, building reputations that become invaluable assets, generating trust that opens doors, creating loyalty that sustains businesses through inevitable difficulties. Marden shared numerous stories of businessmen whose character became their greatest competitive advantage, whose word was considered as reliable as legal contracts, whose promises were trusted implicitly, whose integrity attracted opportunities others couldn't access. One businessman's reputation for absolute honesty was so well established that suppliers extended credit on his word alone. Customers bought products sight unseen based on his recommendation. Partners invested based on his handshake. This reputation wasn't built overnight through grand gestures, but accumulated through countless small choices to do right when wrong would have been easier, to be honest when deception might have served, to act with integrity when no one was watching. The progressive businessman must also develop resilience, the capacity to absorb setbacks without being broken, to learn from failures without being defined by them, to persist through discouragements without losing faith. Business, Marden recognized, involves constant challenges, inevitable failures, regular disappointments, unexpected obstacles. The difference between those who eventually succeed and those who abandon dreams often comes down not to talent or resources or even strategy, but to resilience, to the ability to get back up after being knocked down, to try again after failing, to persist when quitting would be easier. This resilience develops partially through mindset, through choosing to interpret setbacks as temporary and solvable, through maintaining perspective during difficult times, through remembering that every successful person has a history of failures and struggles. But resilience also develops through action, through the practice of getting back up, through deliberately choosing to continue when stopping would be understandable, through building the habit of persistence despite difficulty. One entrepreneur Marden profiled experienced 3 separate business failures before achieving success, each failure more devastating than the last, each involving complete loss of capital and having to restart from nothing. Lesser individuals would have given up after the first, or certainly the second failure, accepting that perhaps business ownership wasn't their path. But this entrepreneur analyzed each failure, learned from mistakes, maintained faith in eventual success, and applied lessons learned to subsequent attempts. The 4th venture succeeded beyond his earlier dreams, and the resilience developed through previous failures proved essential to navigating challenges that arose even in that successful business. Marden understood the progressive businessman must master time management, recognizing that time represents the ultimate non-renewable resource, that how one invests hours and days largely determines what one achieves. Successful businessmen, he observed, treated time as their most precious commodity, protecting it jealously, investing it strategically, refusing to waste it on activities that didn't advance important objectives. This didn't mean becoming so rigid that spontaneity disappeared or so busy that relationships suffered, but rather being intentional about time use, ensuring that daily activities aligned with ultimate goals. The time management principle extended beyond personal productivity to organizational efficiency. Progressive businesses operated with respect for everyone's time, with systems and processes designed to minimize waste, with meetings that had clear purposes and ended when objectives were achieved, with communication that was clear and concise. Marden contrasted efficient organizations where time was valued with chaotic ones where hours disappeared into confusion, unclear expectations, and poor planning. He described a manufacturer who implemented a simple rule: every meeting must have a written agenda distributed in advance, a designated facilitator to keep discussion focused, and a scribe to capture decisions and action items. This discipline transformed meetings from frustrating time sinks into productive sessions that accomplished real work. Employees began volunteering for meeting facilitation roles because the structured approach made participation satisfying rather than draining. The principle of innovation distinguished progressive businesses from stagnant ones in Marden's analysis. While some businesses merely maintained existing operations, producing the same products using the same methods year after year, progressive businesses constantly sought improvements, innovations, better ways to serve customers or operate more efficiently. This innovation didn't necessarily mean dramatic breakthroughs or revolutionary changes, though those might occur, but rather a culture of continuous questioning, experimenting, and improving. The innovative businessman encouraged employees to suggest improvements, rewarded creative thinking, experimented with new approaches, and remained open to possibilities rather than defaulting to "we've always done it this way." This innovative culture created competitive advantages that accumulated over time, with countless small improvements combining into substantial differentiation from competitors stuck in static operations. Marden profiled one innovative manufacturer who designated Friday afternoons as improvement time, when employees could experiment with process modifications, test new tools or techniques, or develop solutions to recurring problems. Initially, some employees wasted this time, uncertain what to do with such freedom. But gradually, a culture emerged where teams competed to develop the most impactful improvements, where innovation became expected rather than exceptional, where the question, "could this be done better?" became automatic rather than rare. Over a decade, the accumulated improvements from these Friday sessions transformed the company from an average competitor into an industry leader. The progressive businessman must also cultivate what Marden called the success habit, the tendency to approach every task, regardless of size or visibility, with excellence and thoroughness. Success, he observed, wasn't primarily about occasional heroic efforts or brilliant strategies, but about consistent execution of fundamentals, about bringing one's best to ordinary tasks, about maintaining standards in routine work. The success habit meant treating every customer interaction as important, every product as a reflection of one's standards, every commitment as sacred, every detail as worthy of attention. This habit developed through conscious practice, through deliberately choosing excellence when adequacy would suffice, through maintaining high standards even when no one was watching, through refusing to let circumstances dictate quality. Over time, excellence became automatic, high standards became natural, thoroughness became reflexive. The individual who developed the success habit didn't need to consciously decide to do good work. Good work became their default mode, their natural approach to any task. Marden shared the story of a young professional who applied the same diligence to minor assignments as to major projects, who treated routine correspondence with the same care as important presentations, who gave his best effort regardless of whether supervisors would notice. Colleagues thought him foolish for wasting effort on insignificant tasks, but he was developing the success habit, training himself in excellence, building a reputation for reliability. When major opportunities arose requiring someone absolutely dependable, someone who could be trusted to handle important matters with care and competence, he was the obvious choice, while colleagues who had conserved effort for important work were passed over because their habit patterns raised doubts about consistent reliability. The principle of specialized knowledge formed another dimension of progressive business success. While general education and broad awareness were valuable, Marden observed that significant success typically required deep expertise in particular areas, specialized knowledge that created unique value and competitive advantage. The progressive businessman, therefore, committed to becoming genuinely expert in his field, to knowing not just basics but nuances, not just current practices but underlying principles, not just what works but why it works. This specialized knowledge came from multiple sources: formal education when available, certainly, but also extensive reading, careful observation, systematic experimentation, learning from both successes and failures, studying competitors and innovators, and relentless questioning. The businessman committed to developing specialized knowledge never stopped learning, never assumed he knew enough, never became complacent about his expertise. One businessman Marden described devoted an hour every morning to studying developments in his industry, reading trade publications, reviewing competitor activities, analyzing emerging trends. Over years, this consistent investment in learning created knowledge advantages that informed better decisions, earlier adaptations to change, and innovations based on deep understanding. While competitors operated on superficial knowledge and conventional wisdom, he operated from genuine expertise that enabled superior performance. Marden emphasized the critical importance of what he termed the margin of power, the reserve capacity that allows businesses and individuals to handle unexpected challenges, opportunities, or demands. Operating at absolute maximum capacity might seem efficient, using every resource and moment productively, but it creates fragility, leaving no buffer for the inevitable surprises business brings. The progressive businessman, therefore, maintained margins, financial reserves for unexpected expenses or opportunities, time buffers in schedules for handling urgent matters, energy reserves for pushing through demanding periods, relationship capital for requesting assistance when needed. These margins might appear inefficient or wasteful to those focused purely on maximizing immediate utilization, but they created resilience and enabled seizing opportunities. The business operating at absolute capacity couldn't respond effectively to unexpected problems, couldn't capitalize on sudden opportunities, couldn't sustain intense effort during critical periods. The business with appropriate margins could weather storms that destroyed under-reserved competitors, could invest in opportunities others lacked resources to pursue, could maintain quality during demanding periods when stretched competitors degraded standards. He told of two competing manufacturers, one operating with minimal inventory and tight cash reserves to maximize efficiency, the other maintaining larger buffers despite the carrying costs. When unexpected supply disruptions occurred, the lean competitor couldn't fulfill orders and lost customers permanently, while the buffered competitor continued operating normally, actually gaining market share by serving customers the competitor couldn't. The margin of power, seemingly wasteful in normal times, proved invaluable during disruption. The progressive businessman must develop the ability to read people accurately, to understand motivations, to perceive character, to recognize competence or its lack. Business inevitably involves working with and through others, employees, partners, suppliers, customers, investors. The ability to judge people well, to identify who can be trusted and who cannot, who will deliver and who will disappoint, dramatically impacts business success. Poor people judgment leads to bad hires, failed partnerships, unmet expectations, and costly mistakes. Good people judgment enables building strong teams, selecting reliable partners, identifying promising talent, and avoiding those who would create problems. This people judgment developed partially through experience, through learning from both good and bad selections, through reflecting on why some relationships succeeded while others failed. But it also required conscious attention, learning to notice patterns and signals, asking probing questions, checking references thoroughly, observing how people behave under various circumstances. Marden cautioned against both excessive cynicism that trusted no one and naive optimism that trusted too readily, advocating instead for discerning judgment based on evidence and observation. One businessman Marden profiled made a practice of conducting multiple interviews with serious candidates for important positions, observing them in various settings, speaking with numerous references, and taking time to make hiring decisions rather than rushing to fill positions. This thorough approach occasionally meant positions remained open longer than ideal, but it dramatically reduced bad hires, building a team of genuinely capable, trustworthy individuals who became the foundation of sustained success. Meanwhile, Competitors who hired quickly to fill positions found themselves in constant cycles of hiring, disappointing performance, and replacing people. The principle of making decisions decisively represented another hallmark of progressive business leadership. While gathering information and considering options carefully was important, Marden observed that excessive deliberation, endless analysis, and inability to commit to decisions paralyzed many potentially successful businessmen. The progressive businessman developed the capacity to make good enough decisions with available information rather than waiting for perfect information that never came, to commit to courses of action while remaining willing to adjust if circumstances changed, to act decisively once reasonable consideration was complete. Decisiveness didn't mean recklessness or impulsivity, but rather the courage to accept that business requires making consequential decisions with incomplete information, and that delaying decisions until certainty arrives usually means missing opportunities or allowing problems to worsen. The decisive businessman gathered relevant information efficiently, consulted appropriate advisors quickly, considered options systematically, and then decided and moved forward, learning and adjusting as outcomes unfolded. Marden contrasted decisive leaders with those who endlessly studied, analyzed, and deliberated, never quite ready to commit, always seeking just a bit more information or one more opinion. While the decisive leader might occasionally make wrong decisions and need to course correct, they made many more decisions overall and capitalized on far more opportunities than the perpetually deliberating individual who made fewer mistakes but also achieved fewer successes. The cultivation of systems thinking distinguished truly progressive businessmen from those focused only on isolated tasks or immediate problems. Systems thinkers understood that businesses were integrated wholes where changes in one area rippled throughout the organization, where solving one problem might create others, where optimizing individual components didn't necessarily optimize overall performance. The progressive businessman, therefore, thought in terms of systems, processes, and interconnections, understanding how various elements related and affected each other. This systems perspective enabled seeing problems more clearly, often revealing that surface issues were actually symptoms of deeper systemic challenges. It enabled designing better solutions that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. It enabled anticipating consequences of changes rather than being surprised by unintended effects. It enabled building organizations that functioned as coherent wholes rather than collections of disconnected parts. One manufacturer, Marden, described faced persistent quality problems that seemed to stem from careless workers. Most managers would have focused on worker training or discipline, treating it as a personnel problem. But this systems thinking leader investigated more deeply, discovering that rushed production schedules pressured workers to cut corners, that inadequate tooling made quality difficult to achieve, that unclear standards left workers uncertain about expectations. By addressing these systemic issues rather than just blaming workers, he solved the quality problems permanently, while competitors continued cycling through training programs that addressed symptoms rather than causes. Marden recognized that the progressive businessman must develop excellent communication skills, the ability to articulate vision clearly, to explain complex ideas simply, to inspire and motivate through words, to negotiate effectively, to persuade without manipulating. Business success depended heavily on communication, convincing customers to buy, inspiring employees to excel, persuading investors to fund, negotiating favorable terms with suppliers, resolving conflicts constructively. Superior communication created advantages across all these domains and more. Effective communication, in Marden's teaching, wasn't about eloquence or impressive vocabulary, but clarity, honesty, and appropriate adaptation to audience. The progressive businessman learned to explain technical concepts to non-technical audiences, to present financial information to those without financial background, to translate vision into concrete action steps, to give feedback that motivated improvement rather than causing defensiveness. He developed the ability to listen actively, to understand what others were really saying beyond their words, to ask questions that revealed important information. One businessman Marden profiled was known for exceptional clarity in all communications, whether written or verbal. He avoided jargon when speaking with those outside his industry, used concrete examples to illustrate abstract concepts, confirmed understanding rather than assuming it, and welcomed questions rather than treating them as interruptions. This communication excellence prevented countless misunderstandings, built strong relationships across diverse stakeholders, and enabled coordinating complex activities that required many people to work together effectively. The principle of creating value, rather than merely extracting it, formed the ethical and practical core of Marden's progressive business philosophy. He observed that some approached business primarily as extraction, seeking to maximize what they took from each transaction, to get the better end of every deal, to minimize what they gave while maximizing what they received. This extractive approach might generate short-term profits, but ultimately undermined relationships, damaged reputations, and created unsustainable business models. The progressive businessmen, by contrast, focused on creating genuine value for customers, employees, suppliers, and communities, understanding that sustainable success came from participating in value creation rather than merely extracting value others created. This value creation orientation led to different questions and priorities. Not, how can I maximize profit on this transaction? But how can I create more value for this customer? Not how little can I pay this employee? But how can I help this employee become more valuable? Not how can I squeeze this supplier? But how can we create mutual benefit? Marden shared numerous examples of businessmen who built enduring success by obsessively focusing on creating value. One retailer constantly sought ways to improve the shopping experience, to offer better selection, to provide more helpful service, to create more convenient processes, asking always how can we make this better for customers, rather than how can we extract more profit. This value creation focus attracted loyal customers who paid premium prices willingly because they received exceptional value, generating higher profits than extractive competitors achieved through lower quality, lower price approaches. As we approach the conclusion of this exploration of Marden's wisdom, we must consider his insights about the relationship between character and destiny, between the person you become and the success you achieve. Marden firmly believed that external success ultimately reflects internal qualities, that what we achieve in the world flows from who we are as individuals, that lasting accomplishment requires building character foundations capable of supporting the weight of achievement. This meant that the aspiring businessman should invest as much energy in personal development as in business skills, should cultivate virtues like integrity, courage, persistence, and compassion, alongside abilities like marketing, operations, and finance. The person of questionable character might achieve temporary success through talent or favorable circumstances, but that success would prove fragile, unable to withstand the inevitable tests and challenges that come with building significant enterprises. Marden told of numerous businessmen who achieved great success rapidly through questionable means, cutting corners, deceiving customers, exploiting employees, only to see their empires crumble when their ethical foundations proved inadequate. He contrasted these cautionary tales with stories of individuals who built more slowly but far more sustainably by maintaining high ethical standards, by treating all stakeholders fairly, by refusing to compromise core values even when doing so seemed to limit short-term opportunities. One particular story involved a young businessman offered a chance to achieve rapid growth through partnerships that would require compromising his commitment to product quality and fair pricing. The opportunity was genuinely attractive, promising wealth and prominence far sooner than his current path would deliver, but accepting would mean abandoning principles he considered fundamental. After much deliberation, he declined the opportunity, choosing the slower but more ethical path. Years later, the promising partnership collapsed in scandal, destroying reputations and businesses of all involved, while his principled approach had built a modest but solid enterprise that continued growing steadily for decades. The progressive businessman in Marden's complete vision was someone who pursued success not merely for personal gain, but as a means of service, who built businesses not just to accumulate wealth, but to create value for communities, who developed capabilities not just for self-advancement, but to contribute meaningfully to others' well-being. This larger sense of purpose, this connection between business success and broader service, provided motivation during difficult times, guided decisions in ambiguous situations, and created meaning that transcended mere profit. As we near the end of this journey through Marden's transformative philosophy, I want to remind you once again, if this content has sparked something within you, if these timeless principles have illuminated your path forward, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Audiobook Library. Your subscription helps us tremendously and enables us to continue bringing you content that can truly transform your thinking and your life. Marden's teachings weren't merely theoretical frameworks or abstract philosophies. They were practical guides forged through careful observation of thousands of successful individuals, refined through his own experiences building and losing and rebuilding businesses, tested against the realities of an often harsh and unforgiving business world. When he taught persistence, he spoke from experience of facing bankruptcy and starting over. When he emphasized integrity, he referenced real businessmen whose reputations became their greatest assets. When he advocated for service orientation, he pointed to actual enterprises that thrived by serving rather than extracting. The power of Marden's message lay partially in this groundedness, this connection to reality rather than fantasy, this acknowledgement that business success required hard work, sacrifice, persistence, and character, rather than quick tricks or shortcuts. He offered no magical formulas, no secret techniques, no easy paths. Instead, he provided timeless principles that, when applied consistently over time, dramatically increase the probability of achieving significant and lasting success. But beyond practical techniques and business principles, Marden offered something perhaps even more valuable, a vision of what business could be at its best, a model of the businessman as creator of value rather than mere accumulator of wealth, a framework for pursuing success in ways that developed rather than degraded character, that served rather than exploited communities, that created rather than extracted value. This vision elevated business from mere money-making to noble calling, from necessary evil to positive force, from selfish pursuit to meaningful service. Young people reading Marden's works discovered that business success was possible for ordinary individuals willing to apply extraordinary effort and maintain high standards, that one's starting circumstances didn't determine ultimate outcomes, that character and commitment mattered more than connections or capital. This message proved revolutionary for many who had assumed success was reserved for those born into privilege, that business ownership required resources they lacked, that significant achievement was beyond their reach. The progressive businessman Marden described wasn't superhuman or extraordinarily talented, but rather someone who consistently applied fundamental principles, who maintained high standards through good times and bad, who treated others fairly, who delivered on commitments, who persisted through obstacles, who continuously improved, who served customers genuinely, who built character alongside capability. These qualities, while demanding, were accessible to anyone willing to develop them through consistent effort over time. As we conclude this exploration, we must acknowledge that Marden's principles remain as relevant today as when he first articulated them over a century ago, perhaps even more so in our current business environment, where technology changes rapidly but human nature remains constant. where competitive pressures intensify but core principles of value creation endure, where new business models emerge but fundamental requirements for success persist. The modern entrepreneur faces different specific challenges than those Marden wrote about. Different technologies, different markets, different competitive dynamics, different regulatory environments. But the underlying principles transcend these surface differences. Today's progressive businessman still needs integrity to build trust, persistence to overcome obstacles, continuous learning to remain relevant, service orientation to create sustainable businesses, character to support lasting success. Consider how Marden's emphasis on thoroughness applies to software development, where rushing to market with incomplete products creates technical debt and user frustration, while investing in quality creates loyal customers and sustainable businesses. Consider how his teaching about relationship building applies in an age of social media, where authentic engagement creates communities while purely transactional approaches generate cynicism. Consider how his focus on continuous improvement aligns perfectly with modern agile methodologies that emphasize iterative development and constant refinement. The entrepreneur who internalizes Marden's principles and adapts them to contemporary contexts gains tremendous advantages. The clarity that comes from understanding timeless principles amid constant change. The confidence that comes from building on proven foundations rather than chasing every new trend. The resilience that comes from character development alongside skill acquisition. The sustainability that comes from creating genuine value rather than merely exploiting opportunities. Marden's legacy extends far beyond the millions who read his books during his lifetime. His influence rippled through generations of business thinkers, success writers, and practical business people who absorbed his principles and applied them in their own contexts. The modern success literature traces much of its lineage to Marden's pioneering work, though often without acknowledgement. Concepts that seem commonplace today, the importance of positive attitude, the power of persistence, the necessity of continuous improvement, the centrality of service, were revolutionary when Marden first championed them systematically. But perhaps Marden's greatest contribution wasn't any specific principle or technique, but rather his fundamental optimism about human potential. His unwavering belief that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things through applying the right principles with sufficient persistence. His conviction that success was available to anyone willing to pay the price in effort and character development. This optimistic vision, grounded in careful observation rather than naive fantasy, inspired countless individuals to attempt more than they otherwise would have, to persist longer than they otherwise might have, to achieve more than they otherwise could have. The progressive businessman Marden described ultimately becomes a force for positive change in the world, building businesses that create jobs, serve customers, support communities, and generate prosperity beyond mere personal enrichment. This businessman innovates solutions to real problems, develops employees' capabilities, treats all stakeholders fairly, contributes to societal well-being, and leaves the business world better than they found it. This isn't just good ethics, it's good business, creating sustainable success built on foundations that endure. As you reflect on Marden's wisdom and consider how to apply it in your own life and business, remember that transformation doesn't happen overnight. That character develops gradually through countless small choices, that capabilities build incrementally through consistent practice, that success emerges from sustained effort rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The journey Marden describes isn't a sprint but a marathon, not a quick fix but a lifelong commitment, not a destination but a continuous process of becoming. Start wherever you are, with whatever resources you have, applying whichever principles resonate most strongly. Perhaps you begin with thoroughness, committing to complete every task fully rather than stopping at good enough. Perhaps you start with continuous learning, dedicating time each day to expanding knowledge and capabilities. Perhaps you focus first on serving others better, seeking ways to create more value for customers or colleagues. The specific starting point matters less than the commitment to start, to apply principles consistently, to persist through inevitable challenges. As you build the habits and develop the character Marden described, you'll notice changes, opportunities appearing that you previously missed, relationships deepening through genuine service, capabilities expanding through deliberate development, confidence growing from consistent delivery, success accumulating from sustained effort. These changes won't be dramatic or sudden, but gradual and cumulative, building over months and years into transformation you might not have believed possible when you started. The path won't be easy. Marden never promised ease, only that the principles worked for those who applied them persistently. You'll face setbacks that test your persistence, discouragements that challenge your optimism, obstacles that seem insurmountable, temptations to compromise standards or abandon principles. These moments separate those who achieve lasting success from those who give up prematurely, those who build character from those who remain undeveloped, those who realize potential from those who settle for less. During difficult moments, return to these principles. Remember the countless individuals who persisted through worse circumstances to achieve remarkable success. Reconnect with your larger purpose beyond immediate profit. Recommit to the character qualities and business practices that create sustainable achievement. The progressive businessman doesn't succeed by avoiding challenges, but by meeting them with courage, integrity, persistence, and faith that consistent application of sound principles ultimately prevails. Before we part, I want to ask you for one final favor. Please check out the other videos in our audiobook library collection. We have a wealth of transformative content waiting for you, timeless wisdom from great thinkers that can guide you on your journey to success and fulfillment. And here's something remarkable. 97% of our viewers haven't yet subscribed to our channel. If you found value in this content, if these principles have inspired you, if this journey through Marden's wisdom has been worthwhile, please be among the 3% who take action. Subscribe now, help us grow, and ensure you never miss content that could change your life. Orison Swett Marden's message ultimately comes down to this: you possess far greater potential than you probably recognize. Success is possible through applying timeless principles consistently. Character matters more than circumstances. Service creates sustainability. Persistence overcomes obstacles. Continuous improvement compounds advantages. Integrity builds invaluable reputation, and the progressive businessman who embraces these truths can achieve remarkable success while making positive contributions to the world. Your journey toward becoming a progressive businessman begins now, in this moment, with the decision to embrace these principles, to commit to the path of continuous development, to persist through challenges, to serve others genuinely, to build character alongside capability, to create value rather than merely extracting it. The success you seek awaits not in some distant future, but in the daily choices you make, the standards you maintain, the principles you apply, the character you develop. Marden believed in you, believed in the potential of ordinary individuals to achieve extraordinary results through extraordinary commitment to timeless principles. He spent his life documenting, teaching, and championing these principles because he knew they worked, because he had seen them transform countless lives, because he had experienced their power in his own journey from orphaned farm boy to influential author and successful businessman. Now these principles are yours to apply, to test, to prove in your own experience. The question isn't whether they work. Decades of evidence confirms their effectiveness. The question is whether you will apply them, whether you will persist when challenged, whether you will maintain standards when pressured, whether you will serve when tempted to exploit, whether you will build character when shortcuts beckon. The progressive businessman within you awaits development, ready to emerge through your commitment to these timeless principles, your dedication to continuous improvement, your service to others, your persistence through obstacles, your integrity in all dealings, your thoroughness in all work, your enthusiasm for creating value, your courage to take risks, your wisdom to build character. This businessman represents your highest potential in the realm of business and achievement, the person you can become through embracing the philosophy Marden spent his life articulating. Begin today. Choose one principle to focus on this week. Apply it consistently in every relevant situation. Notice the results. Build on successes. Learn from setbacks. Add another principle next week. Keep building, keep developing, keep applying, keep persisting. Month by month, year by year, you'll transform. Your business will grow. Your impact will expand. Your success will compound. All through the steady application of these proven, timeless principles. The world needs progressive businessmen and businesswomen now more than ever. Individuals who create value while building character, who serve others while achieving success, who innovate solutions while maintaining integrity, who build sustainable enterprises while developing their communities. You can be such a person. You can live these principles. You can achieve remarkable success while making positive contributions. You can prove in your own life what Marden taught through his writings. Your journey of transformation starts now. The principles are clear. The path is proven. The potential is enormous. All that remains is your decision to begin, your commitment to persist, your dedication to becoming the progressive businessman these principles will develop. Make that commitment now. Begin this journey today. Transform your life and business through these timeless truths. The success you seek, the impact you desire, the person you can become, all await your decision to embrace and apply the progressive business philosophy Orison Swett Marden spent his life sharing with the world.